I thought burying my only son was the worst thing that could happen to a mother. I was wrong. The real end began at our last Sunday dinner, when he handed me a bottle of vitamins and his wife smiled just a little too sweetly. I switched that bottle in the kitchen on a cold hunch. Now that plastic jar hidden in my purse is the only proof that his heart attack was actually murder. My name is Margaret O'Connor. I am 68 years old, and I have lived in the same drafty house in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, for longer than I care to count. Today, the wind off Lake Erie cut through my wool coat like a serrated knife, but I barely felt it. I was too busy staring at the hole in the ground that was waiting to swallow my only son, Daniel. The sky was a flat, unyielding grey, the kind that promised snow before the sun went down. The cemetery was crowded. People from the parish and neighbours I had known for 40 years stood in small clusters, a mix of black and white faces huddled together against the biting cold. The pastor was saying something about peace and eternal rest, the same script he used for everyone, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The only sounds that truly registered in my ears were the thumping of my own heart, ragged and slow, and the heavy thud of the first clump of dirt hitting the mahogany casket. It was a sound of finality that no mother should ever have to hear. Then there was Courtney. My daughter-in-law stood a few feet away, looking less like a grieving widow and more like she was waiting for a tedious business meeting to end. She wore a black dress that was far too tight for a funeral, and a designer coat that probably cost more than my car. Her stiletto heels kept sinking into the soft, muddy earth, forcing her to shift her weight constantly to keep from toppling over. She did not shed a tear. Instead, she kept glancing at the lit face of her smartwatch, tapping the screen with a manicured fingernail as if checking notifications. I felt a profound sense of alienation looking at her. When people approached her, offering soft condolences, she gave them a tight, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. It was cold and social, a mask she wore effortlessly. The children were not even here. She had left them with a sitter, claiming she wanted to spare them the trauma. But I knew she just did not want the distraction of handling them while she played the part of the bereaved wife. As the machinery began to lower Daniel down into the dark, the cold reality of the moment blurred, and my mind drifted back 2 weeks. It went back to the last time I saw him alive, sitting at my dining table. It was our standard Sunday dinner. The house had smelled of pot roast and rosemary. We were eating mashed potatoes and collard greens, simple food that Daniel loved. He looked tired, but happy then, teasing me about my stubborn refusal to retire. He laughed about how I still drove my rusting sedan every morning to my part-time job at Lakeview Municipal Services, telling me I needed to relax and enjoy my golden years. Toward the end of the meal, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel wiped his mouth with a napkin and reached under his chair. He looked a bit awkward as he placed a plastic bottle on the table. It was a large jar of joint supplements. He told me that Courtney had picked them out for me. He pushed the bottle across the tablecloth and said, "Mum, take this. It will help your knees." I looked up. Courtney was sitting across from him, and for the first time that evening, she was beaming. Her smile was wide, showing too many teeth, and her eyes were locked onto my hands as I picked up the bottle. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the Ohio winter. It was a primal feeling, the kind of instinct you develop after decades of navigating a hard life. Courtney had never cared about my knees. She had never cared if I could walk or crawl, as long as I stayed out of her way. Seeing her look so pleased, so eager for me to open that seal, made my stomach turn. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that I must not put anything from that bottle into my body. I thanked them, keeping my voice steady. I told them I needed a glass of water to wash them down. I walked into the kitchen, the linoleum creaking familiar sounds under my feet. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharp. I opened the pantry where I kept my overflow of medicines. I grabbed the new bottle and shoved it deep behind a stack of canned soups in a hidden nook I used for emergency cash. Then, I grabbed my old, nearly empty bottle of the exact same brand from the counter. I walked back into the dining room, shook 2 pills out of the old bottle, and swallowed them with a gulp of water. Courtney watched the muscles in my throat move. She looked satisfied. She leaned back in her chair, relaxing for the first time all night. She had no idea that the real bottle was sitting safe in the dark of my pantry, and she had just handed me the weapon that would eventually destroy her. The house was too full. 30 years ago, Patrick and I had bought this modest 2-story colonial in Riverside Heights, imagining it as a sanctuary for our family. But after the funeral, it felt more like a cage. The air was thick with the smell of tuna casseroles, greasy fried chicken, and store-bought apple pies that the neighbours had piled onto the dining table. I sat in Patrick's old wingback chair in the corner of the living room, my hands resting on the worn velvet armrests. People from the neighbourhood and Daniel's old friends drifted past me like ghosts. They leaned in to tell me what a good man my son was, or how much he looked like his father. I nodded and whispered my thanks, but their voices sounded like distant traffic, a dull roar that could not penetrate the wall of numbness surrounding me. Slowly, the crowd thinned out. The last of the neighbours squeezed my shoulder and murmured, "Call me if you need anything," before slipping out into the cold Ohio evening. The front door clicked shut for the final time, and the house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The shadows of the late afternoon stretched long across the floorboards. It was just the 2 of us now. Me, sinking into the upholstery, and Courtney, who had disappeared upstairs the moment the last guest left. When she came back down, the transformation was jarring. She had shed the black funeral dress and the uncomfortable heels. Now, she wore a tight beige sweater that clung to her frame and a pair of designer jeans. Her makeup was touched up, fresh and flawless. She did not look like a woman who had just buried her husband. She looked like she was ready for a casual dinner date. She walked into the living room, stopped in front of the fireplace, and looked at me with eyes that were completely dry. "The show is over, Mom," she said. Her voice was dry and crackling, stripped of the soft, trembling tone she had used at the graveside. I looked up at her, confused by the sudden shift. She did not give me time to speak. She crossed her arms and told me to stop performing the role of the tragic, grieving mother. She said we needed to have a serious conversation about the house, the budget, and the future. In seconds, she had turned the space where we had just mourned my son into a cold, hostile boardroom. Courtney reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a manila folder. She tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a slap that echoed in the quiet room. She told me that Daniel had signed the house over to her 6 weeks before it happened. She called me a stubborn old woman and said I had 30 days to pack my things and leave. My hands were trembling, but the fog in my brain began to clear. I reached for my reading glasses and opened the file. The document was titled Quitclaim Deed. I read the lines carefully. Grantor Daniel O'Connor. Grantee Courtney O'Connor. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. There was a signature, but it made my stomach drop. It said, Daniel O'Connor. But the lines were shaky and the loops were wrong. I had watched that boy write his name on homework, birthday cards, and checks for 40 years. The slant was too sharp. That was not his hand. Courtney began to pace, spinning a story about how Daniel was drowning in debt. She claimed his auto shop, Rust Belt Motors, was failing, and that he had used the house as collateral for a massive loan to keep it afloat. I sat there and listened to her lies without blinking. She did not know that I was the silent partner in Rust Belt Motors. I had given Daniel the startup capital, and I saw the books every month. The business was healthy. There was no debt. She stopped pacing and leaned in close, her face twisting into a sneer. She told me that if I was not out in 30 days, she would call the Cleveland police and report me for criminal trespassing. At that moment, the crushing weight of my grief vanished. It was replaced by something else. Something hard and cold, like a block of ice settling in my chest. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in my skirt. I looked her in the eye and said, calmly, that I only needed one night to gather my things. I walked past her, up the stairs to my bedroom, and pulled my old travel backpack from the closet. I packed 3 changes of clothes and my financial ledger. Then, I went to the secret nook in the kitchen pantry and retrieved the bottle of vitamins she had given me at dinner. I wrapped it tightly in a handkerchief and tucked it deep inside the bag. I was leaving, but I was taking the truth with me. That night, I did not go to a shelter, nor did I sleep on the sofa of a friend. I had too much pride for that. Instead, I called a car from a ride-sharing app and directed the driver to a budget hotel in downtown Cleveland. It was a simple place, clean but worn. The same establishment I used to book whenever Patrick had his long treatments at the clinic nearby. The room smelled of lemon polish and stale air. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress under the buzzing yellow light of the bedside lamp and pulled the bottle of vitamins from my bag. I turned it over in my hands. The seal was intact, but something was wrong. The label was glued on, slightly askew, and the expiration date was smudged, the ink looking wet and cheap. It reminded me of those investigative reports on the evening news about counterfeit medication sold online. The next morning, I called Alana Brooks. Alana was a sharp, 45-year-old woman with skin the color of deep mahogany and a mind like a steel trap. She had been Patrick's attorney for years and was the sole trustee of the Patrick O'Connor Community Trust. We met at her office in the Lake Erie Plaza. It was a fortress of glass and steel that towered over the grey city. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, holding a cup of hot tea to warm my hands. I told her everything. I spoke about the funeral, the cold ultimatum Courtney had delivered in my living room, and the bottle of pills I had refused to take. Alana listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned to her computer and typed a few commands. She spun the monitor around so I could see. On the screen was a high-resolution scan of the quitclaim deed. Courtney had emailed it to Alana weeks ago, claiming she was asking for a review on Daniel's behalf. Alana pulled up another window, showing Daniel's signature from his business license and his passport. Look at the difference. Margaret, she said, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. I saw it immediately. The signature on the deed was hesitant, the loops too tight. It was a forgery, and a bad one at that. But then Alana leaned back and folded her hands. She told me that even if Daniel had signed it with his own blood, it would not matter. The document was worthless paper. She explained that 10 years ago, right after Patrick got his diagnosis, we had moved every single asset into the trust. The house in Riverside Heights, the garage building, the rental properties. None of them were in my name or Daniel's name. They belonged to the trust. I only had a personal checking account for daily expenses. A memory hit me so hard I nearly dropped my tea. I was back in the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic filling my nose. Patrick had grabbed my hand, his grip weak, but his eyes fierce. He had told me that he did not want someone walking into our lives one day, flashing a pretty smile, and taking everything we built. I realized then that he was not just protecting the money, he was protecting me. He had foreseen a day when I might be too old or too trusting to fight back. Alana explained that Courtney, Daniel, and whatever cheap strip mall lawyer Courtney had consulted clearly did not understand how the estate was structured. They assumed the house was a simple asset they could transfer. They were wrong. Alana offered me two choices. We could file a police report immediately for forgery and attempted fraud. Or, she said, her eyes drifting to the plastic bottle I had placed on her mahogany desk, we could wait. She picked up the bottle and looked at the smudged label. She told me that if Courtney was cold enough to forge my son's signature to steal a house, she would not be surprised if she was willing to put something dangerous in a bottle of pills intended for her mother-in-law. She suggested we send the vitamins to an independent lab for testing. I looked at the bottle, thinking of Daniel's sudden heart attack, and I nodded. We would test the pills. Alana did not want me playing detective on my own, so she gave me a name, Rafael Vega. He was a former homicide detective for the Cleveland Police Department who had retired early, or perhaps he was pushed out for being too good at his job. He was a mountain of a man, Latino, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of a worn leather jacket. He had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, dark and sharp, scanning the world as if looking for a crack in the pavement. He told me he specialized in finding the things the police were too busy or too indifferent to look for. We met at a 24-hour diner near the Greyhound station, a place where the coffee tasted like burnt rubber and the patrons kept their heads down. I sat there stirring creamer into my mug, watching the swirl turn grey, and I told him everything. I told him about the red flags I had ignored for years. I told him about Courtney's obsession with appearances, the credit cards that always seemed to be maxed out, and the trips to the casino she claimed were just harmless fun. I told him how she always had a story to explain away missing money, usually blaming it on bank errors or identity theft. Raphael took notes in a small notebook, his pen scratching loudly against the paper. He went to work fast. Within 48 hours, he had torn through the financial records like a storm. He sat me down and laid it out. Daniel was not in debt. His credit score was pristine. The auto shop, Rust Belt Motors, was turning a healthy profit, and his taxes were paid in full. The story Courtney had spun about Daniel using the house as collateral was a complete fabrication. It was a lie designed to cover her own tracks. Raphael had dug deeper into Courtney's digital footprint. It turned out my daughter-in-law had a secret life. He found multiple accounts on offshore sports betting sites, the kind that operate out of islands with loose regulations. She was moving money through digital wallets, thousands of dollars at a time. But the scariest part was a series of regular cash withdrawals and transfers to a known loan shark in Detroit, who went by the name Big Lou. Courtney was not just bad with money. She was in deep with dangerous people. Then the call came from the lab. The independent toxicology report on the vitamins was back. I felt the blood drain from my face when Raphael read the results. The pills in that bottle were not supplements. They contained a high concentration of warfarin. It is a blood thinner, often used as rat poison. In small, controlled doses, it prevents strokes. In the dosage found in those pills, taken daily by a woman my age, it would cause massive internal bleeding. It would look like a natural medical event, but it would be a slow, painful execution. Raphael did not stop there. He pulled surveillance footage from a gas station near the Westfield Flats, close to the apartment Daniel and Courtney had been renting. The timestamp was from the night Daniel died. The video was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. It showed Daniel and Courtney inside his car. They were not talking. They were screaming. I could see Daniel's hands flying in the air. At one point, he reached into the back seat and grabbed a thick stack of white papers. He threw them at Courtney, the pages fluttering in the cabin like trapped birds. Then he got out of the car and walked away, leaving her sitting there with her face buried in her hands. Raphael had traced Daniel's phone logs from that week. My son had not been calling banks or loan officers. He had made 3 calls to a family law firm in Shaker Ridge, a wealthy suburb known for high-stakes divorces. He had even visited their office in person 2 days before his heart stopped. The picture was terrifyingly clear. Daniel had found out. He had found out about the gambling, the debt to Big Lou, and maybe even the theft. He had hired a lawyer and drafted papers to end the marriage. The fight in the car was him confronting her. He had handed her the evidence, and in doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. Raphael closed his notebook and looked at me across the sticky diner table. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through the booth. He said, "Mrs. O'Connor, your son did not die of a heart attack. I do not need a coroner's report to tell me that. But we are going to need one if we want to put the person who did this behind bars." I looked out the window at the grey Cleveland street. My son had tried to leave her. He had tried to protect himself and me. And because he was a good man who played by the rules, she had killed him. Now, I knew exactly what I had to do. Raphael and Alana drove me out to Shaker Ridge to meet with a woman named Maria Flores. She was a family law attorney, operating out of a discreet office that smelled of old paper and expensive perfume. Initially, she was guarded, citing attorney-client privilege. But when Alana laid the toxicology report on her desk and Raphael mentioned the name Big Lou, her professional demeanor cracked. She looked at the photo of Daniel I had placed on the table, and her expression softened into something pained and sympathetic. She agreed to speak within the ethical bounds of her profession, but what she had to say was enough to shatter the last remnants of my denial. Maria told us that Daniel had come to her office 2 days before he died. He was not the calm, steady son I knew. He was frantic. He had brought a chaotic pile of documents with him, including secret bank statements, printed emails from offshore betting sites, and the scanned copy of the forged quitclaim deed. He had finally put the pieces together. He knew Courtney was stealing from us to feed a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control. Then came the revelation that made the air in the room turn ice cold. Daniel had not just come for advice. He had taken action. Right there in her office, 48 hours before his heart supposedly stopped. Daniel had signed a petition for divorce. He cited financial abuse and fraud. But he went further. He executed a new will, revoking every previous testament and explicitly cutting Courtney out of any inheritance. He left everything to me. He had told Maria that he was terrified of what Courtney might do when the wall of money crumbled around her. He left the originals in Maria's safe, telling her that the papers he had in his car, the ones he threw at Courtney that night, were just copies. He wanted her to know he was serious, but he was smart enough not to hand her the only leverage he had. Alana and Raphael exchanged a dark look. We had found the motive. It was not just greed, it was survival. With the new will signed, Courtney stood to lose absolutely everything if Daniel proceeded with the divorce. If he died, she would get nothing. But she did not know about the new will. She likely thought that if she stopped the divorce by stopping his heart, she would inherit the estate as his grieving widow. She was drowning in debt to dangerous men in Detroit, and Daniel was about to cut the lifeline. She had no choice left but to kill him. Armed with this new evidence, the warfare in the pills, the forged deed, the gambling debts, and the secret divorce filing, Alana filed an emergency motion with the Cuyahoga County Court. We were asking for something that no mother ever wants to ask for. We needed to exhume Daniel's body. The days that followed were a blur of legal arguments and sleepless nights, but the judge granted the order. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the pen hovering over the consent form. My hand shook so violently I had to grip my wrist with the other hand to steady it. The thought of them digging him up, of disturbing his rest, felt like a physical blow to my chest. I told Raphael that there is no pain worse than unearthing your own child, unless you are doing it to prove he was murdered. I signed my name. 2 weeks later, we sat in Alana's office again, waiting for the official report from the county medical examiner. When the courier arrived, the room went silent. Alana opened the envelope and read the summary first, her eyes scanning the page rapidly. She let out a long breath and slid the paper across the desk to me. The report was conclusive. Daniel did not die of a myocardial infarction. There was no blockage in his arteries. Instead, he had died from massive, diffuse internal hemorrhaging. His blood had lost the ability to clot. The toxicology screen confirmed the presence of warfarin in his system at lethal levels, built up over a period of weeks. It matched the timeline of when Courtney gave me the vitamins perfectly. She had been poisoning him slowly, likely mixing it into his food or his own supplements, waiting for his body to give out. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death as homicide. My son had not left me. He had been taken, and now we had the science to prove it. When Courtney received the civil investigation notice regarding the forged deed and the whisper of a rumor about the exhumation, she did not pack her bags. She did not flee. Instead, she panicked for exactly 1 hour. And then she went on the offensive. She decided that if she was going to go down, she would take my reputation and the O'Connor name with her. She was going to tell her version of the story first, and she knew exactly who would listen. She contacted Don Harper, a reporter for Channel 7 Cleveland, whom she had met once at a charity gala. She pitched him a story that was too juicy for local news to ignore. She claimed to be a desperate widow being persecuted by a wealthy, vindictive estate. By the time the segment aired during the primetime slot on Sunday night, Courtney had set the stage perfectly. I watched it from my hotel room, sitting on the edge of the bed with a knot in my stomach. On the screen, Courtney was sitting on the beige sofa in my living room, the very place where she had told me to get out. The lighting was soft and warm, designed to make her look angelic. Her hair was down, loose and slightly messy, and she wore almost no makeup. She looked young, fragile, and utterly broken. She wiped away a tear and looked directly into the camera. She told the world that she was just a poor girl from a small town who had fallen in love. Then she twisted the knife. She began to talk about Patrick. She described him not as the hard-working, generous man he was, but as a rich black patriarch who had hated her because she was white and poor. She painted a picture of a powerful black family using their wealth and the legal system to crush a helpless white widow. She claimed that I, along with my ruthless attorney Alana, was trying to overturn Daniel's dying wish. She said we were trying to steal the house that Daniel had gifted her before his tragic death. She sobbed, saying we called her a gold digger and threatened her with the police. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I felt the old, ugly tensions of the Midwest rising up as I watched. I remembered the looks Patrick and I used to get 40 years ago when we walked down the street together. He with his dark skin and me with my pale Irish complexion. Courtney was tapping into that deep vein of racial resentment. She knew that, for a certain segment of the audience, the story of a white woman being victimized by a powerful black estate needed no evidence to be believed. It just needed to be said. The reaction was instant. Social media exploded. I watched in horror as the hashtag Justice for Courtney began to trend on Twitter. Strangers were leaving comments calling me a greedy old hag. They called Alana a corrupt operator. There were threats, violent and specific, directed at a woman they had never met, all based on the tears of a liar. I called Alana, my voice shaking with rage. I told her we needed to go on television. I wanted to show them the new will. I wanted to show them the toxicology report and the bottle of rat poison. I wanted to scream the truth until they heard me. Alana refused. Her voice was calm, anchoring me. She told me that Courtney was trying to drag us into the mud. She explained that the more we argued on television, the more I would look like the powerful aggressor attacking a grieving widow. She said we needed the courtroom, not the camera lens. Raphael agreed with her, though for a different reason. He was watching the interview with a predator's focus. He pointed out that every word Courtney said on that broadcast was a trap she was setting for herself. She stated on record that Daniel had gifted her the house. She stated he had no debts. She stated that we hated her for her race. These were verifiable lies. Every time she repeated them to the public, she was locking herself into a narrative that we could dismantle with paper trails and bank statements. She was handing us the rope to hang her, provided we had the patience to let her tie the knot. I listened to them, and slowly, the heat in my blood turned cold. I picked up the remote and turned off the television, silencing Courtney's sobbing face. Outside the hotel window, snow was falling on Lake Erie, disappearing into the dark water. I made a silent promise to my son. She had left me with a smeared name and a hatred directed at our family, but I would return it to her. I would not clear his name with tears or public pleas. I would do it with cold, hard facts. She wanted a media circus, but I was going to give her a funeral for her freedom. Raphael moved fast, like a hound that had finally caught a scent he could not ignore. While Courtney was busy playing the victim on television, Raphael was dissecting the financial ruin she had left behind. He started with the bank records that Daniel had tried so hard to hide from me, likely out of shame. He found a pattern of cash withdrawals, $500 here, $800 there, all taken from ATMs located just a few miles from the Emerald Dunes Casino in Pennsylvania. These were not the actions of a woman who hated gambling, as she had claimed. They were the desperate clawing of an addict. He dug deeper and found a series of small, odd transfers to a generic account that he traced back to a shell company. It took him 2 days to crack it, but he found the man behind the curtain. It was the associate of a loan shark operating out of Detroit, a man known on the street as Big Lou. Courtney was not just losing money at the tables, she was borrowing it from people who broke legs for a living. Raphael managed to charm a security manager at Emerald Dunes into showing him surveillance footage from 3 months ago. The video was grainy, but it was damning. There was Courtney, sitting at a blackjack table at 3 a.m, looking haggard and frantic. But the most chilling clip was from the parking lot. It showed Courtney being cornered by a large man with heavy tattoos on his neck. He was shouting, pointing a finger in her face, and she was shrinking back against her car, terrified. It was clearly a collection attempt that had gone wrong. Then came the poison. Raphael went to the neighborhood where Courtney had grown up, a rougher part of town, and found a small, independent pharmacy. He showed the pharmacist her picture. The man remembered her. He said she had come in about 4 months ago asking for the strongest rat poison they had, claiming she had an infestation in her garage. She had paid in cash. She did not use a loyalty card. She wanted to be invisible. But in a place like that, people remember a woman dressed in designer clothes, buying industrial toxins. The pieces began to lock together with terrifying precision. The final forensic report on Daniel came back, and it painted a gruesome picture of his last weeks. His internal organs showed signs of long-term damage consistent with microdosing of warfarin. He had not been given a single massive dose. He had been poisoned slowly, over the course of 6 or 8 weeks. It matched the exact timeline of when Courtney had started her sudden interest in health, buying him supplements and insisting he take them every morning. Raphael even found the link to the hospital. He pulled phone records that showed a dozen short calls between Courtney and a number registered to a night shift nurse at the hospital where Daniel died. It turned out to be an old high school friend of hers. Raphael suspected, and the police later confirmed, that Courtney had manipulated this friend into suggesting to the attending physician that Daniel's symptoms looked like a natural stroke, steering the diagnosis away from poisoning just enough to get the death certificate signed without an autopsy. But the final nail in her coffin was a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Detroit. Raphael found out she had been renting it by the month, keeping it as a safe house or a storage unit. He coordinated with Alana to get the Detroit police involved, and they executed a search. Inside, hidden under a mattress that smelled of stale smoke and despair, was a hard-shell suitcase. It contained thousands of dollars in casino chips, a stack of betting slips, and a handwritten ledger detailing exactly how much she owed Big Lou. The total was over $50,000, and tucked in the side pocket of that suitcase was the smoking gun. It was another bottle of those joint vitamins. It was identical to the one she had given me, but this one was half empty. The police lab tested the remaining pills. Every single one of them was laced with warfarin. The lot numbers on the bottle had been scratched off. The atmosphere in the investigation changed instantly. This was no longer a civil dispute about a house. The county prosecutor looked at the evidence Raphael had gathered: the debt, the forged deed, the slow poisoning, the new will she was trying to bury, and realized this was capital murder. It was a cold, calculated plan to kill her husband for the inheritance and then kill her mother-in-law to eliminate the only other claimant to the property. We sat in Alana's office late one night. Raphael had taped everything to the glass wall of the conference room. It looked like a spiderweb of red marker. There were lines connecting the casino to the debt to the poison to the motel, and the motel to the bottle in my purse. Every single line, every arrow, and every motive pointed directly to the smiling face of Courtney O'Connor. We had her. Now. We just had to make sure the trap snapped shut before she realized she was caught. The county prosecutor told us he wanted a final nail in the coffin. He said the forensic evidence was strong, but juries can be fickle, and he wanted something visceral. He wanted a confession, or at least a slip of the tongue that no defense lawyer could explain away. Raphael suggested we use the one weapon Courtney seemed unable to resist. We would use her own arrogance against her. We would stage a second Sunday dinner. I forced myself to dial her number. My hand felt heavy as I held the receiver. When she answered, her voice was sharp, expecting a fight. I lowered my tone, making myself sound frail and exhausted. I told her I was tired of the lawyers. I told her I was afraid of going to court and running out of money. I hinted that if she agreed to stop the attacks on the news, I was ready to hand over the keys and walk away. I played the part of the defeated old woman perfectly. I could practically hear her greed through the phone line. She agreed to come over on Saturday night to finalize the terms. The house in Riverside Heights looked the same from the outside, but inside, it was a trap. The police had come in hours before. They had taped tiny microphones under the lip of the dining table and behind the spice rack in the kitchen. 2 plainclothes officers were parked down the street in a beat-up sedan, acting like neighbors having engine trouble. Raphael and another detective were squeezed into the small laundry room off the kitchen, watching a monitor with headphones on. I stood in the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. On the counter, I had arranged 2 identical plastic bottles. One was a fresh jar of joint supplements I had bought at the drugstore. The other was the half-empty bottle Raphael had seized from her suitcase in Detroit, the one dusted with enough warfare in to kill a horse. Courtney arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in like she already owned the place, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floors. She did not bring a casserole. She sat at the head of the table, in Daniel's chair. I sat opposite her, keeping my hands folded to hide the shaking. I started speaking softly. I told her I was overwhelmed. I told her that fighting her was destroying my health and that I just wanted peace. I mentioned that the exhumation had been too much for me to bear, and I just wanted the results to stay buried along with my son. I saw her shoulders relax. She thought she had won. She thought I was surrendering because I was weak, not because I was waiting. Then, the venom started to spill out. She leaned back, looking around the room with a sneer. She brought up Patrick again. She called him a small man who got lucky, saying that if he had really cared about family, he would not have tied the money up in trusts. Then she looked at me with cold, dead eyes and said that Daniel would still be sitting right here if I had not poisoned his mind with ideas about divorce and new wills. She practically admitted that his attempt to leave her was the reason he was dead. I stood up and walked to the counter. I picked up the bottle from the motel, the one laced with poison. I walked back to the table and slid it across the wood until it rested right in front of her. I asked her if she still wanted to look out for my health. Courtney looked at the bottle. She did not recoil. Instead, she let out a short, sharp laugh. It was the sound of someone who believes they are untouchable. She looked me in the eye and said that if I had just taken them regularly like she asked, a lot of things would have been much simpler for everyone. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. I saw the realization hit her eyes. She replayed her own words in her head and realized she had just confirmed that the pills were a solution to a problem. not a cure for a condition. Before she could speak again, the door to the laundry room flew open. Raphael stepped out, followed by the two officers. He held up a recorder and told her that the conversation had been captured pursuant to a court order. He told her to stay exactly where she was. Courtney scrambled back, her chair screeching against the floor. She started screaming that it was a joke, that she was just having a dark sense of humor. But her eyes were fixed on that bottle of vitamins. She looked at it with pure terror. I stood up straight. I did not feel like a tired old woman anymore. I reached out and picked up the tainted bottle from the table. I spoke clearly, making sure the microphones caught every syllable. I told her that she had given me a bottle exactly like this one on the night Daniel died. I told her I had switched it. I looked at her trembling face and said that the only thing I regretted was that I could not switch the bottle she gave to my son. The trial for the first-degree murder of Daniel O'Connor began 3 months later at the Cuyahoga County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. The story of the grieving widow turned black widow had captured the local imagination, and the gallery was filled with reporters. I spotted Don Harper, the man who had broadcast Courtney's lies to the world, squeezed into the third row. He was not holding a microphone today. He was just another spectator, forced to watch the truth dismantle the story he had helped construct. Courtney had a new defense attorney, a slick man with expensive suits and a practiced frown. He tried to paint a picture of Courtney as a misunderstood victim. In his opening statement, he pointed a finger at me, accusing me of being a bitter mother obsessed with conspiracy theories. He called the exhumation of my son an act of inhumanity, a desecration of the dead driven by grief and malice. I sat behind the prosecutor, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring straight ahead. I let him talk. I knew what was coming. The prosecutor began his case methodically. He did not rely on theatrics. He called the county medical examiner to the stand. The doctor was a small, dry man who spoke in precise medical terms. He did not use gruesome language, which made his testimony even more chilling. He explained how warfarin works, how it inhibits the blood's ability to clot. He described how Daniel did not die quickly. He died over weeks, his internal organs slowly weeping blood until his system collapsed. It was a slow, invisible suffocation. Next came the pharmacist from the rundown neighborhood. He identified Courtney immediately as the woman who had bought the industrial-strength rat poison with cash. Then came the shift manager from the Emerald Dunes Casino, who walked the jury through the logs of Courtney's disastrous losses, totaling tens of thousands of dollars in a single weekend. Raphael took the stand to present the video evidence. He played the footage from the gas station on large monitors facing the jury box. The room went silent as they watched Daniel, alive and furious, throwing that thick stack of papers at his wife. It was not the body language of a loving couple. It was the desperate final act of a marriage that had already ended. The jury could see the tension, the shouting, the way Daniel pointed a finger at her before driving away. Then came the legal wrecking ball. Maria Flores testified clearly and firmly. She confirmed that Daniel had signed divorce papers and a new will 48 hours before his death. She read the clause aloud, where he explicitly disinherited Courtney. This shattered the lie Courtney had told on television about Daniel gifting her the house. Alana followed, explaining the structure of the Patrick O'Connor Community Trust. She showed the jury the quitclaim deed. She explained that even if the signature had been real, the document was legally worthless. Courtney had forged a paper to steal a house that Daniel did not even own. The climax of the trial came when the prosecutor played the audio recording from the second dinner. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. My voice came through the speakers, sounding frail and scared, asking if she still wanted to look out for my health. Then Courtney's voice cut through the air, arrogant and dismissive. If you had taken them regular, a lot of things would have been much simpler. Courtney's lawyer tried to object, tried to claim it was a joke, a dark comment taken out of context. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor destroyed that defense. He asked how a joke explained the suitcase found in the motel room outside Detroit. He asked how a joke explained the $50,000 owed to a loan shark named Big Lou. He asked how a joke explained the second bottle of vitamins found in her possession, half empty and laced with the exact same poison found in Daniel's body. The defense crumbled. There was no explanation for the suitcase. There was no explanation for the debt. There was no explanation for the poison. The prosecutor's closing argument was brief but devastating. He stood in front of the jury box and looked at Courtney, who was now staring down at the table, her face pale and stripped of all its artifice. He said that this woman did not just kill her husband for money. She killed him for money she could not even touch. And when she realized the house was not hers, she planned to kill his mother to erase the last witness. He turned to the jury and said the only mistake she made was underestimating who she was dealing with. She thought a quiet, older woman with grey hair and trembling hands would just do as she was told. She thought Margaret O'Connor would swallow those pills without question. She was wrong. When the bailiff called my name to take the stand, the walk to the front of the courtroom felt like the longest journey of my life. I sat down and placed my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth, a concept that seemed foreign to the woman sitting at the defense table. I looked at Courtney. The black mourning veil was gone. The carefully applied makeup was gone. All that was left was a woman with frantic eyes and trembling hands, stripped of her disguises. All the pain she had caused me, all the sleepless nights, seemed to compress into a single, sharp line in my chest, rigid as a saw blade. I recounted the details of that last Sunday dinner with surgical precision. I described how Daniel had looked at me with love when he handed me the bottle, and how Courtney had looked at me with a predator's focus. I explained the cold prickle of instinct that ran down my spine, the intuition of a mother who has seen enough of the world to know when a smile does not reach the eyes. I told the jury how I took the bottle into the kitchen, hid it in the pantry, and swapped it with my old one. The prosecutor stepped forward and asked the question we had prepared. He asked what would happen if I had not switched those bottles. I looked directly at the jury members. I told them that if I had not listened to that gut feeling, they would be looking at 2 funerals instead of 1. I said that Courtney had killed my son, but she forgot one thing. I told them that I have lived long enough to recognize when someone is celebrating too soon. The defense attorney tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He pointed out my old car and my worn coat, trying to paint me as a woman desperate for financial security. He asked if I was simply jealous of Courtney's youth and potential inheritance. I remained calm. I leaned into the microphone and revealed something I had never spoken about publicly. I told the court that Patrick and I chose to live simply. We drove used cars and clipped coupons because we wanted to, not because we had to. I explained that the Patrick O'Connor Community Trust held assets that would make the price of the house in Riverside Heights look like pocket change. I looked at Courtney and said that she thought we had nothing, so she killed a man for grocery money. That was the spark. Courtney stood up so fast, her chair fell backward with a crash. She screamed that it was not grocery money. She screamed that it was everything she had. The courtroom gasped. The judge banged his gavel, threatening to hold her in contempt. But the prosecutor just offered a thin, cold smile. He remained silent. He knew that her outburst had done more to prove her motive than 1,000 hours of testimony ever could. In one sentence, she had exposed her entire value system to the jury. In his closing argument, the prosecutor wove the strands together into an unbreakable rope. The gambling debts, the forged deed, the secret will, the rat poison in the motel room, and the confession on the tapes. He connected it all to that final scream in the courtroom. He told them that Courtney O'Connor was a woman who was willing to commit murder rather than face the reality of her own failures. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I sat on the hard wooden bench, clutching my mother's old rosary in my pocket until the beads left indentations in my palm. I did not pray for revenge. I did not even pray for Courtney's soul. I only prayed that when people spoke of Daniel from this day forward, they would not call him the man with the weak heart. They would call him the man who was taken too soon. When the foreman read the verdict of guilty on all counts, Courtney collapsed. She began to sob, shouting Daniel's name and accusing me of killing him with stress and paperwork. But this time, the cameras did not swivel to follow her. The lens of history had shifted. The reporters watched me as I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I took a deep breath. I whispered to the empty air that I had switched the bottle, and karma had taken care of the rest. Justice would not bring him back, but it would stop her from selling his memory for a quick payout. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, biting Ohio sunlight. The air was cold, but it felt clean. I did not have a grand speech for the reporters waiting on the steps. I did not promise to start a foundation. I just wanted to go home to my quiet house. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you ever feel like someone is underestimating you just because of your grey hair or your quiet nature, remember that the person who says the least is often the one holding the final card. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from today. I would love to hear your thoughts and read your own stories about a time you had to trust your gut instinct. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people. Stay safe out there.